you're going through this process. You're just so nervous about what it's going to do to, from a disruption standpoint for your family. You got to go take this role for work, but you're kind of nervous about it. You've never had a government really evaluating you before and checking into, what your background is and, making a decision about what your future is going to be. Again, that's heightened sensitivities. And if we, in our capacity as legal professionals and folks that are working in the immigration space, we always have to keep that in mind to afford employees the best experience that we can give them and not be part of the problem, right? Not be somebody that's accentuating sensitivities.
Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Immigration and Mobility Decoded. I'm Eric, and joining me as always is Finn, the wonderful Finn. I just want to throw in a little adjective there. Finn, how's it going?
It's going good. Happy to be enjoying the first day of spring. How about yourself, Eric?
Totally going well as well over here as well. How was your weekend? Was it as filled with basketball as mine was?
No, I'm not as big of a college basketball fan, mostly just by the nature of where I grew up and not really having, great teams to root for. So I spent most of the weekend outside, got a full-on spring day on Saturday, and then yesterday was a complete winter day. So getting a bit of mixed emotions here.
You're making me look bad. I had a relaxing weekend, but I was just watching basketball pretty much all day Thursday, not all day Thursday. A lot of Friday, a lot of Saturday, a lot of Sunday. YouTube TV. So I have YouTube TV. They came out with this new multi-view thing, so you can watch 3 games at once, and that was pretty awesome.
Is that what you get for the raised prices?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. But then there's another fun game that I think is super fun to talk about briefly. Is the World Baseball Classic is going on, and the U.S. won last night against Cuba. Saturday night they beat Venezuela. They were down 7-5, and then Trey Turner just hit a monster grand slam to put them ahead. So now they're in the finals, and I think the other semifinal game is I think tonight, Monday night, March 20th, and I think it'll be super interesting if Japan makes it to the finals. So we can see Shohei Ohtani play against the U.S. That'd be a pretty sweet matchup.
I was gonna say, so it's like the Olympics where all of the best immigrant players in the MLB go back and play for their home countries.
I would actually think of it more as like the World Cup of baseball, where they have, I think it was like about 20 teams qualify. They do like the pool, the group stages, and then they go into a single elimination game to keep advancing. But so obviously MLB draws in a lot of talent from around the world. And so for this, a lot of the players, or some of the players, went back to their home countries. So, for instance, the Chicago White Sox, the team that I root for, they have two Cuban players, Yohan Moncada and Luis Robert, and they both are playing for Cuba. Were playing for Cuba. Cuba lost last night to the U.S. And then there are other instances of Canada's team. Freddie Freeman, his mom was Canadian, so he decided to play for Canada to kind of honor her. So there's a lot of cool stories of players choosing to play for their home countries. And this is honestly, I think, one of the first years that the U.S. drew in the talent that it did. Obviously, baseball is a huge sport here in the States. Again, you get a lot of good talent coming in from just countries all over the world. And for whatever reason, the World Baseball Classic in the U.S. didn't really take off, but until now, since they got Trey Turner, Lance Lynn, Mike Trout, Nolan Arenado, Paul Goldschmidt, the list goes on and on and on. So really exciting to watch. But as much as we can talk about baseball, Finn, we are here to talk about immigration and mobility. The episode that it will be coming up soon is our conversation with Brendan Coggan. Super interesting conversation, super fun conversation. Brendan is the Senior Vice President of Global Services at Envoy Global. But before we get there, Finn, I think let's hop into our immigration news roundup. And Finn, late last week, there was some, maybe breaking news, but super important news regarding the ongoing H-1B electronic registration. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, well, I think on Thursday, the system went down for the H-1B registration lottery, and that caused a lot of panic and confusion because the last day to register H-1B cap cases was supposed to be Friday, March 17th. So the night before, the system crashing, a lot of companies wait. They prepare all their registration applications beforehand, and then they hit send on the last day there. So I think there was a lot of stress around that. But Eric, what happened with the extension on that? We're recording this on March 20th, and there's some updates.
Yeah, totally. So it was, I think we first started to catch a glimpse of something going on with the electronic registration system Thursday evening. USCIS put up a message on their LinkedIn. And then Friday afternoon, Friday evening, word officially came out that they would be extending electronic registration to March 20th at 5 p.m. Eastern. So by the time everyone's listening to this, the electronic registration period will have ended. But, again, it's super important to bring up, Finn, to your point, because it's, one of the biggest times of the year for employers, for foreign national employees looking to come, to secure that H-1B visa. In my opinion, weirdly enough, USAS didn't really put out a press release. So we'll see what's going on there. But yeah, again,
I wonder if it's a symptom of what our immigration trends report predicted, which is more H-1B cap registrations than last year, which, as our audience might know, was a record 483,000 registrations for a coveted 85,000 slots. I wonder if, maybe the system crashing means that there are more registrations, or maybe it's just good old fashioned, government website having a hard time with volume.
Right. Well, that would kind of be the weird thing, because this is the electronic registration was first used in 2020. And when it went live, I think it's also an important caveat to throw out that was when we all went work from home. So everyone was kind of already like scrambling. And the system held up in 2020, 21, 22. And USCIS has even touted the response from employers. I think they said about, like, on a scale of 5, employers or people who are using it were rated electronic registration like 4.8 or something like that. So yeah, maybe Finn, maybe you're onto something with just the amount of registrations. And last year, do you remember approximately how long it took for the registration to close for us to then find out how many registrations were submitted?
I think it was the first week of April, but last year I believe they closed the registrations a little bit later. So it could be sooner this year. It would be great if we were able to find out before the next podcast and talk through what the implications of that are.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of an upcoming podcast, there was a recent study that came out from the Niskanen Center, and they looked at the amount of college graduates that the United States is losing after the graduates obtain their degrees, particularly to Canada. And they looked at, so the study from the Niskanen Center found that the U.S. is struggling to retain high-value international students because of the immigration system. Finn, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be talking with one of the main authors of this study. But can you unpack what this study found and some other interesting tidbits?
Yeah, so it was new data, never before released. The Niskanen Center obtained it and analyzed it and just released their results. But the short version is that between 2017 and 2021, approximately 45,000 individuals, skilled workers who graduated from U.S. institutions, U.S. colleges, left the U.S. to work in Canada. 88% of that 45,000 were non-U.S. citizens, so they were foreign nationals. So really what it means is that it's a symptom of the lack of visa availability in the U.S. and the fact that Canada, we spoke with Arf about this a couple weeks ago, that Canada is creating many more pathways for these high-skilled graduates to go to Canada and get a job there. And it's really a symptom. Dick Burke, our CEO, wrote an op-ed about this in The Hill a month or two back, It's really just a symptom of U.S. visa restrictions, barriers here that are causing all of these highly educated, skilled individuals who come to the U.S. to study and plan to work here, but instead they're going out to Canada where there's just more opportunity to obtain a visa and permanence.
That will be an interesting conversation we have with the Niskanen Center coming up. That episode should be released within the next month or so, so stay tuned for that. Speaking of which, if you haven't already and you're either listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, definitely would appreciate a follow. If you're watching on YouTube, we definitely would appreciate a subscribe and a like. It's really going to help us, get this podcast, get this content in front of others in the immigration and mobility space. Finn, there's another article that is super interesting from our friend Stuart Anderson. Labor Department creates permanent immigration chaos. Very eye-catching title. And he writes, quote, "The Department of Labor has created chaos for employers by denying applications needed to sponsor employment-based immigrants." Finn, what is he writing about?
Yeah, so this is something we covered in the immigration trends survey as well. We asked respondents of the survey which of the three government agencies that deal with employment-based immigration the most they felt was the biggest barrier to sponsoring foreign national employees. So the options were the Department of Labor, USCIS, and the Department of State. And by a margin of more than 2-1, 61% of respondents said the Department of Labor was the biggest barrier for companies to sponsor foreign employees. And the Department of Labor deals primarily with the first step of the green card process, which is known as the PERM. The PERM process, prevailing wage and PERM process. And essentially what Stuart Anderson was covering is that over the past couple of years, more of these PERM applications have been getting denied by the Department of Labor, meaning that a company invests time and resources in preparing those applications for an employee, and then it gets denied, and they either have to start over or not pursue the green card process for that employee. And the other thing that Stuart highlights is just the wait times for these applications to be processed by the Department of Labor has increased significantly, from an average of a couple of months to now almost a year or more in many cases, which is just really making it even more difficult for employers to sponsor these foreign national employees for employment-based green card and get that process started. So it's certainly something we're tracking and Stuart's tracking, and we're hoping to see everyone's hoping to see some resolve there, resolution there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to add further to what you just mentioned, the wave of denied perm applications has, as Anderson writes, seemingly kind of come out of nowhere. He says that the DOL has changed the way it adjudicates perm applications, but that they haven't provided public notice. For some data, he compiled in Q1 of fiscal year 2022, the perm application denial rate was 3.2%. And then in Q1 of fiscal year 2023, it was 6.8%. So yeah, something we'll monitor, and we can include the links to those articles in the notes or the description for everyone to check out.
Final note on that. One thing that's worth noting is that the labor secretary is changing.
Yes.
Previously, it was the former mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh, who was the labor secretary. He's leaving, and there's a new labor secretary coming in. So it'll be interesting to see if under her regime, the process changes at all. But Eric, we're really excited about our conversation today. You mentioned it before with Brendan Coggan. Really, really smart, interesting guy who's been in the immigration and global mobility space for a long time. Has a lot of great insights for those who are maybe new to understanding what global mobility is, and for seasoned global mobility professionals. He just has a lot to share.
Definitely. Yep. I think that's a perfect segue to our conversation with Brendan Coggan. Now I'd like to welcome Brendan Coggan, the Senior Vice President of Global Services from Envoy Global, to the show. Brendan, how are things going?
Things are going well, Eric. Always good to be in touch with you, and Finn. Nice to see you, man. Everything's plowing along. We're in the Bay Area. We're kind of just focused on the weather at this point, and making sure that nothing's being flooded or drowned or trees are falling on the cars. But so far, so good. So far, so good.
Love to hear it.
Yeah. And otherwise, things are chugging along. We've got a lot of momentum and a lot of work coming in on the immigration front. Our clients seem to be churning. Business travels picking back up. We're coming out of COVID a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting time for sure. On one end, very busy. On the other end, the economy is kind of tough, and dealing with how that impacts immigration programs and the companies that we're working with. So lots going on, enough to keep us busy, I think.
Great to hear. And we'll definitely hop into, the growth in business travel and global immigration in just a couple minutes. Mm-hmm. But Brendan, just want to kind of just introduce you to our listeners in case they're, in case they're unfamiliar with you. So you are Senior Vice President of Global Services at Envoy. How long have you been in the global immigration, / global mobility space?
Yeah. So I've been in the global immigration space essentially the entirety of what I would call my real career, going on 13 years now. First real office job out of college. My other real career was bar backing at a German restaurant for 3 years just before that. So, going quite the transition. Mm-hmm. But yeah, 13 years. And, it's one of those situations where I knew I wanted to give a law firm environment a try, which I did, mm-hmm. right? And going through all of the different potential opportunities, one that came across was just, I think at the time called a global immigration specialist or a global immigration associate or something along those lines. And the word global sounded cool. So then I got into it and been doing it ever since. Been working with it ever since. And, really happy that I've stuck with it.
Nice. So when you came across that job opening and you obviously went to law school, did you study immigration law while in law school, or is this just something you just came across? You're like, I want to do that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So from, coming out of undergrad is when I took the first global immigration position, and I kind of had this, idea in my head. I said, all right, let's give this global immigration job a try. And if I really am into it and I really want to, pursue it after, let me give it 2 years and maybe I'll go to law school, right? If that's something that really shakes out. And, that plan is one that I ended up following. And then come law school, yes, I did take a few courses in immigration law. In fact, famously, maybe famously for me, not for everybody else, but famously in my own brain, in law school, I ended up actually studying with the same U.S. immigration professor that many of the partners at my firm at the time had also studied, and I always considered myself to be just so much younger, right, than the rest of my partners. But it turned out that we all had the same teacher, so probably get over that age difference pretty quick.
Yeah, awesome. So you walk in your first day as an immigration attorney. What was that like?
Well, it was great because that meant that I passed the bar and was done with law school, which means that I was, just happy to have all of those boxes ticked, and
you started to make real money.
Well, a little bit better on that front, but even more so, I was somebody who was essentially working full time in law school while I was studying, and same thing, a little bit of a break just before taking the bar to study, but the prospect of kind of narrowing down what I was focused on every day was really enticing to me. And so being able to at that time, because I was working with the same firm that I ended up being an attorney at, right after law school and right after passing the bar, it was a little bit more of just being able to singularly focus on what I was interested in and what I was focused on, and kind of not have the school part going on. And then also, being able to take that next step within an environment that I had been in already, and been, working towards taking that next step. So the ability to do that was really, really a happy moment for me. And walking in through those doors, again, I'm glad that I, stuck to that plan and really, kind of pursued, through what needed to happen to get me to that first day, right? That first day as an associate. Yeah.
Yeah. What's something cool or fun that people may not know about immigration attorneys or the global immigration space?
Yeah. So, I'm not sure if it's, such a hidden fact, but it's something that I think drives a lot of people that are at least in the global immigration space. And, the fun part for me, and this is, this extends back to even all the kind of things that I enjoyed doing as a kid and doing in college and, all the way up until now, is the diversity of the work, right? In the global immigration space, we've got over 195 countries that we're essentially responsible for, right? For our clients. And, to put it, to put it sort of mildly, that is a really, it gets really complicated because you have to know a lot and you have to be on top of a lot, but you get to experience a lot, right? And you get to learn, new things every day because every country is changing things every day, right? And clients have new needs in new countries every day. And so I think that's what keeps myself, a lot of our colleagues on the global immigration side, and other people in the industry, frankly, that are in this global mobility space. I think that's what keeps everybody so inspired and so happy with what they're doing, is that ability to kind of get insight and get exposure to new things and new places, and the job not getting old or repetitive or stagnant. And that's just the nature of the business, which I think is, great. So, the shorter answer to that question, Eric, is, I think the understanding of the fact that everybody on the global immigration side gets to learn something new pretty much every day by virtue of the type of work that it is, and how cool that is, right? How awesome it is to go into work and come home now we're all at home, but come home and know that you took something away that's new, that's in your toolbox that you can share with others. So, yeah.
On that note, Brendan, you're a notoriously well-traveled guy. I feel like the company can play a game of where in the world is Brendan at any given time, and it would surprise all of us to hear where you are. Tell us a little bit about your travels in 2022 and what you have coming up in 2023. Anything exciting? Any highlights?
Yeah. So, I don't want to be an international man of mystery here. It's not a Carmen Sandiego situation. But I think that one of the other benefits, or one of the cool things, I think, for a lot of us in the global immigration space is, that travel is kind of necessary, in a lot of instances. The businesses that we're working with and the partners that we're working with and the other people that are in our industry are necessarily everywhere, right? All around the world. And I think if there's one thing that the pandemic has kind of instilled in a lot of us is, the technology is great. Things like this are great. Video, we can keep in better communication with everybody without seeing them than we've ever been able to in the past. But there's still that human element, that that relationship establishment, all of those kind of things that come with getting together in person and really getting to know people, and how important that is to the business. So, early in the pandemic, Finn, just before the pandemic, it's not incorrect to say that I was probably on the road on a flight, every 2 weeks, or really every week leading up to just when the shutdowns happened. Combination, international, domestic travel, all for the same purpose, though, of, making sure that we're making those connections and that people know that they've got me and they've got our team and they've got everybody that, is here to support them. And then the pandemic struck, and all of a sudden, I hadn't traveled for, maybe a year and a half before, I next got on a flight. And, I'll admit, for the first, 3 or 4 weeks, kind of nice, right? Not spending so much time at the airport, not going through security, not doing all of these kind of things, in your same time zone, in your house. It was nice, but, you get the itch pretty quickly after being used to traveling and wanting to get back out there. So come 2022, people are getting, much back out there. And it's not just me, in the organization, a lot of folks that have these relationships to establish and these initiatives to take forward, I think seized on the ability to travel a little bit more freely as things were rolled back country to country. Done a little bit going to visit, one of our bigger operations in the UK, where we have a really large team and our EMEA support is emanating out of. Traveling to Singapore last year, where another one of our larger operations is managing all of APAC and that Singapore program there with that awesome team. And then, a few things here, there in between. The conferences are starting to get a little bit more populated, more people showing up. Just making sure that we're out there too and maximizing the ability that we have, to get with the people that we need to, remain in touch with and show our support to. And I would expect the same for 2023, Finn. We know where we've grown a lot and where we haven't had the chance to really spend much time as a team or as a group. And we know where, we've had clients that have come on board and we know where they're operating and all these kind of things that, necessarily drive the travel initially. So very much looking forward to it this year. I think probably a bit of the same as 2022.
So I think we've alluded to it a little bit already here, Brendan, but your work is very complex. And I think we want to unpack what you do for our audience here and explain how it might be impactful for any folks who are working at companies that we serve or we may serve in the future. Eric, before I start talking shop, is there anything else you wanted to hit on with Brendan?
Just some quick hitters. Brendan, obviously you live in the San Francisco Bay Area, huge sports guy like myself and Finn. Quick outlook on the Giants' upcoming season.
Excited for the Giants. I will say the baseball thing tends to be a mixed bag in the Bay Area here and there. So we went through maybe one of the best decades of my life when the Giants were, winning the World Series every other year. Great time. But coming into the season, and actually, I'm actually in Arizona right now for some unforeseen circumstances, but I'm in Arizona right now, and the Giants spring training is happening like literally 30 minutes from where I'm at right now. But the outlook on the season is I'm gonna just wait and see and not get my hopes up too high, but also be confident and spirit on the team through my totally not superstitious way of watching games. So the even year Giants was so fun to watch, and that 2014 Game 7 when Bumgarner came in. That was my super senior of school. Little fun fact there, I had to do an extra year. And my buddies were out at the bars, and I was like, me and another guy were like, no, we feel something special is going on here, so we actually just stayed behind and watched Bumgarner throw that gem. Incredible. And so my fun fact, I was at that game.
Oh, nice.
And but the one exposure, the one experience I've had at a just championship game of any sport was attending a game, Bumgarner on the mound, and our ticket was the very last row in the entire stadium. And I remember looking behind me. If you're ever in that row, don't look behind you. I remember looking behind me. It's essentially a chain link fence, a couple of scaffoldings, and just a straight drop down into the parking lot next to an ambulance, though, which would have gotten
there. You go. Yeah. There you go. NCAA tournament starts, men's and women's, starts this week. You got any predictions on the men's and women's side?
So I'll just go one prediction, and I think this one's an uncommon one, but I have faith that, I'm not going to guarantee it. I have faith that Gonzaga is going to go to the Final Four again this year.
Okay.
All of that aside, I don't know anything, but we'll see if that happens. The first couple of days of the tournament, there's nothing else like it. So coming up tomorrow and Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday too. The all day of games is always special. Though I think I read a stat somewhere that it's X number of billions of dollars of lost productivity for a lot of
totally
during the first 2 days of the tournament. So just keep an eye on making sure your work's getting done, I think.
Yep. And then final question for our audience to get to know you before we hop into the global immigration landscape. You and Finn were just chatting about traveling a lot for work, but when you're not traveling for work, when it's the weekends or when it's 5, 6 o'clock. What are your enjoyments outside of work?
Yeah. Sports obviously coming up. I'm a TV watcher just overall, I would say. My ideal scenario nowadays is if I'm relaxing, then I am on the couch and I am watching television and taking in something, that somebody else has put me onto. Right. So if there's sports on, that's great. I'm currently watching The Last of Us on HBO right now. Which has made me just fundamentally afraid of mushrooms, essentially, and adding those to my diet. But enjoy a good series, enjoy good TV leading into the evening, and just hanging out and taking a load off. Yeah,
nice.
Got a few guests now, and I think everyone's saying they're watching The Last of Us. It's more infectious than those cordyceps mushrooms.
Yeah. Well put. I just watched the last episode yesterday, actually. So looking forward to it. Boomeranging around. No spoilers.
There we go. All right, transition into talking shop here. I want to set the stage because I think the folks who will listen to this or watch this could come from a range of different backgrounds. We could have global mobility savants like yourself who will understand all of the terminology in the space. And then we might have folks who are aware of immigration, global immigration, but maybe not as fluid, not as experienced with some of the processes involved. And then we may have folks listening who know, zilch about global immigration, global mobility. So to set the stage at a high level, could you just explain what global mobility is in a corporate space and just in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of maybe a similar answer for both there, Finn. The idea of global mobility is just the ability for people to seamlessly and compliantly move from one location to another, typically internationally, and be able to achieve whatever goal they are trying to achieve in that destination jurisdiction. So in the corporate sense, Finn, to your point, that typically means being able to move an employee and maybe their family members, if they have accompanying dependents, from one location to another location, allowing them to do business travel, or more commonly, well, not more commonly, but usually in the sense of global mobility, more well contemplated, the ability to work and reside, in that destination, and then everything that comes with it. And I know we always come at it from the immigration sense, but global mobility really does encapsulate a lot of different things, right? Immigration, the relocation, how am I going to get my house set up, my kids in school, the dogs over to the house compliantly. And then also, of course, everybody's favorite topic too, the tax piece, right? What is this going to implicate from a tax side? Putting all of those things together, and allowing all of those things to work symbiotically so that we can have one person, one employee or a program of employees going from one place to another and be able to continue what they need to do in that other jurisdiction.
Yeah, I think you hit on the human piece there, which is really important, right? That these are, if a company is transferring an employee from one destination to another, like that's a person's life. And there's a lot of aspects of a person's life that needs to be considered.
Yeah. And I think, that's something that we, in our program are really consistently re-emphasizing to everybody, that's doing this kind of work. And actually it's something that we hire for, frankly, from a personality standpoint. And the reason for that is, I think in this space, right, when you're doing this kind of work every day, that's one of the things that maybe is easy to forget, right? Is just how human of an experience or human of a business this is. And, really in reality, what we're working with are people that are in one way or another, a very sensitive time in their life, right? You're either maybe over the moon, right? You're going to go to your dream location. You got your dream job. You're going to give your family this amazing experience that not everybody gets to take advantage of, just growing up or whatever it might be. And you really want that to work out, right? You don't want to miss out on that. That heightens sensitivities a little bit. Other end of the spectrum can be the case too, right? Maybe you're going through this process. You're just so nervous about what it's going to do from a disruption standpoint for your family. You got to go take this role for work, but you're kind of nervous about it. You've never had a government really evaluating you before and checking into, what your background is and, making a decision about what your future is going to be. again, that's heightened sensitivities. And if we, in our capacity as legal professionals and folks that are working in the immigration space, we always have to keep that in mind to afford employees the best experience that we can give them and not be part of the problem, right? Not be somebody that's accentuating sensitivities or making things, more, less sort of consistent or less or more impactful than they need to be. And really smoothing that process for the employees that we work with so that we can help them feel comfortable, right, as they're working through these processes. And you can only do that if you're really putting yourself in another person's shoes.
Yeah. And just one more question to kind of cap off the stage setting here. And then Eric, I'll toss it back to you for a few questions. But we're all three of us are in the U.S. We're in various destinations, right? There are a lot of U.S. based companies that need to relocate, transfer, send their employees overseas for various reasons to various destinations. But that's the same for a company that's based in Germany that has German employees who need to send those folks to different destinations overseas. In 2023, in the current landscape, what are the most popular destinations to send foreign talent to or domestic talent to overseas? For business travel, full-time relocation, all of that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's one that on one end of the spectrum kind of remains the same over the course of years. And then on the other end of the spectrum might surprise you, right? Especially on the business travel front, and especially considering the circumstances that we've had going on in the world the last couple of years between COVID and between the geopolitical circumstances that we're seeing in Europe. I think that, one of the, there's a few common steady locations where we know folks are going to continue to need to and want to go, right? US is a really popular destination and it remains as such. The UK, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Japan, many of the EU countries all have been consistently, primary destinations for places where companies know that they need to do business, right? It's either where the main focal point of their operations are now, or later down the road, they know that this is going to be our path to expansion. We want to open up in one of these jurisdictions because there's business to be done there. And so many of those jurisdictions stay the same. But then when you start considering how all of that develops, especially from a business travel perspective, you start seeing a pretty wide plethora of places that folks need to visit, oftentimes based on just industry, right? And so if you are you'll see for companies in Texas where there's a lot of oil and gas, for instance, right? A lot of that travel and a lot of that business is going to be necessarily in Africa, right? Or Southeast Asia, because you're going, and this is where some mining operations are happening or some refinement operations are happening, all of those kind of things. Whereas, out by me in the tech space, a lot of that business travel necessarily happens to kind of anywhere in the Western world, where we've decided that the next phase of where we're going to find customers is in these next level countries where we're traveling to. So the one thing that I'd add in is we are at present seeing just a boom in business travel needs for our clients, and an added emphasis really on not just securing business visas or the appropriate type of travel visa for folks to get to where they're going, but an added layer of compliance review, right? And making sure that people that are saying they need to travel for business are actually, by the letter of the law, traveling for business, and making sure that the company has a little bit of a fact check on that one, or a compliance check on that, so that the business itself is protected from any kind of negative ramifications from some discovery of unauthorized work or whatever it might be. And I think we're seeing this boom a little bit for two reasons. One, business travel, even with developments in the last couple of days, business travel to China is booming because China has been hard to get to over the course of the pandemic, right? And now it's opening up slowly, inch by inch. And as soon as companies are feeling like they can reasonably make plans to get into China based on the system, they're going. So the rollback of the pandemic has been, one part of that. The other part is just the way that countries are looking at immigration now and how important compliance is. I think that things were a little bit looser pre-pandemic, especially with respect to what qualifies as sometimes business travel and what doesn't. And now, after some time to review and companies knowing how important compliance is, especially in this world now that we have post-pandemic, that compliance has become such a big factor. And so we're seeing that boom come through in that aspect of handling that work as well. So it's really interesting. It really is. But I see the increase in business travel, and it makes me think, a little bit of happy thoughts, right? Folks are getting back out there. Restrictions are easing, or if not non-existent at this point for some countries. And it's a little bit more business as usual, which I think people have been, wanting to hear and wanting to experience for a long time.
Totally. Brendan, you listed some countries as popular destinations. Do these other countries have the same restrictive or slow-moving immigration system as the U.S.? Obviously, the U.S. is a popular destination, as you mentioned, but we all know pretty well the lack of changes or reforms that are implemented.
Yep.
Curious to hear from your perspective, how do other countries approach immigration changes and reforms to their systems?
Yeah, I think it's no small secret that making change and lasting immigration reform in the U.S. is really difficult, right? And that's a function of our legislative process overall. That's a function of, if a president wants to issue an executive order, they can, but that might get rolled back or put on pause just based on a judge. And said the lasting impacts really have to come from Congress, right? It has to come from legislative change and new rules and regulations that come as a result of that. And that is not always the fastest moving process, right? For a lot of reasons, both the procedural process, but then also, there's different motives and different, parties involved that can decide to slow that process up or speed it up or whatever it might be. You don't see that as much in the non-US space. I think comparatively, there's two things that really stick out from the when you are looking at the US immigration process versus the immigration processes in some of the other more popular destinations around the world. And the one is that the first one is likelihoods of approval for work authorization or other types of permanent residency applications seem to be and are frankly more reliable and higher than what you see in the U.S. And that's often a reason that other jurisdictions, Canada, UK, Australia, whatever it might be, why a lot of these other jurisdictions are heavily considered by employers that have U.S. immigration needs as places where they can park somebody, right, for a year or two, or where they can actually have somebody take up their role in a different jurisdiction just in case the U.S. process doesn't work out. And to have that kind of backup kind of speaks to what the process is like in a lot of these other countries, right? There's more of a reliability that you end up getting a status one way or another and figuring those kind of things out. Now, there's no 100% guarantee on any of these kind of things, right? And in these other spaces, you still have to fit eligibility requirements. You still have to be able to prove and evidence that you are going to be somebody that's desirable for the country by the terms of the way that they're set up. But often in what we've seen, the reliability of understanding those requirements and eligibility rules, and then what that translates to in terms of likelihood for approval of applications, tends to be a little bit more solid than what you'd see in the U.S. And the U.S. system's process is it's complex, right? It's hard. There's a lot of different factors here, a lot of different interests. And in some other jurisdictions, immigration is just a higher priority as something that's used to entice people to come to the country. I think, we've talked about this, Eric, I know with you a number of times, but one of the cleanest examples of that is just what Canada has done over the course of the last number of years, right? We're going to increase the number of permanent residents that we want. We're going to increase the number of work permit holders. And a lot of that was in direct response to the U.S. getting more difficult with immigration, especially over the previous presidency, right? And the idea being, well, this is an opportunity for us to make immigration easier, but target the type of talent and the type of individuals that we want here to boom our economy and to make our country, more robust in the, in whichever space you want, usually tech, but there's others as well. So it is really interesting. And when you compare the two, just as an example, the U.S. and Canadian immigration regimes, a lot of the visa types and work authorization statuses, they line up pretty nicely, right? You go, oh, that's the equivalent of this. Oh, that's the equivalent of that. But if you look at the actual granular processing times and, what comes with an application filing and your likelihood of approval, it's almost night and day, oftentimes. And, Canada's just one that you can count on a little bit more for a lot of folks. So, it is interesting. I think when we look at the global immigration space, it doesn't, many of the jurisdictions, I'll say, that seem to be most popular don't carry a lot of the hardships or difficulties that you often see on the U.S. immigration side.
That's super interesting to hear, and yeah, everything you said just makes sense. So I'm curious, using this example of, let's say you have an employer based in Germany and they want to send someone to the U.S., but the U.S. government red tape gets in the way. How do you work with employers to navigate those circumstances?
Yeah, it's there's not really a one size fits all policy on that, but there's a few key criteria that you usually look into, right? The first one being, if the employer is, sort of, lack of better words, hell bent on keeping the employee, keeping them in their position, and making sure that there's some continuity here, and are worried about what's going to transpire on the U.S. side. We'll typically look at, it's a frank conversation with the employer to understand, where are you comfortable having this employee, right? How can they still do, maybe, the U.S. position was something where they're going to be in the same time zone as their team. They can collaborate, they can get together. Maybe having them on the other side of the world just isn't going to work, right? And so understanding where employer is interested or feels able to have that employee work and still meet business goals, and then set them up for whatever future type of location that they might be looking at if the next step isn't the permanent place, right? Maybe the U.S. remains where we want to end up permanently, but we got to do something in the meantime. Then it comes down to, okay, these are the places or the regions or the sort of the parameters of where we feel like it's okay for this individual to be as an employer. Where is that feasible within those parameters? And oftentimes that'll come down to, where do you have an office? Where maybe is there a robust and understood remote work visa or nomadic visa, nomad visa immigration regime that we can take advantage of? Where is it going to be something that a country has a process set up to compliantly and formally allow this employee to work in a way that has been contemplated by those authorities already, right? If you can't find one of those locations and the employer still wants to push, then it's a little bit more time for the outside of the box thinking and getting creative with strategy. But usually employers are, in my experience at least, mostly content with going through steps 1 and 2 there, and just understanding, where can we set this individual up? How can we make sure that the business goals are being met and the personal goals of the individual are being met? And how are we setting ourselves up for the future, depending on what the preferences for the future may be for all parties involved?
Are you able to share the most creative solution you've been a part of?
Yeah, I think
or
so.
Details of it?
Yeah, for sure. This goes back to the no one size fits all sort of approach. And when you get to that level, either there's countries that are just able to facilitate this kind of arrangement compliantly, but without all of that other infrastructure being set up already. Or you're talking about making use of different types of visa application types that maybe aren't perfectly suited for it. And there's going to be other things that are involved for this employee to take advantage of and to work through, whether that's attending classes or, going through, something else that will compliantly allow for them to kind of handle both, right? Work, residence, and the extra aspect of things. I think the pandemic raised a lot of opportunity for us to get creative, because all of a sudden, even if you could suffice what the regular immigration needs were, now there's entry restrictions, and you're coming from this place, and actually you were able to come in here yesterday, but there was a spike in your country, so now you can't come in here today. That kind of thing happening. And so one of the things and one of the most hospitable locations that came up the most over that pandemic period was Mexico, right? Mexico as a location is very interesting because, and this is similar to some other countries, but Mexico being very popular, as a foreign national, depending on what other visas you might hold, you might be eligible, if you keep your activities in check, you might be eligible to stay in Mexico for up to half a year, potentially longer, without needing to get a visa at all. Right. And so, for folks that we knew eventually wanted to get to the United States, but for some reason that's not possible. Or for folks that knew that they needed to be in this time zone for a prolonged period of time for business initiatives and things like that, when at a time when the U.S. Almost impossible to get into, Canada almost impossible to get into, Mexico is facilitating this kind of travel, right? And granted, your circumstances need to be right. You still need to be compliant as you're doing this. You need to have your activities in check. You have a little bit more flexibility to work in Mexico without getting long-term work authorization, just if you're otherwise allowed to be there. And as long as you're not checking a couple of other boxes like getting paid in country and, having a contract in country and all of those kind of things. But if you were, say, an Indian national that had that need, and you can't get into the US, you can't get into Canada, but you happen to be holding a Japanese business visa, or you happen to be holding a Schengen visa for the EU, you're actually eligible to get into Mexico for half a year and take advantage of the benefits of doing that at least. So a few folks that we assisted that way. There was a lot of Caribbean states, some Middle Eastern states that were sort of first to market with remote and nomad visas, and kind of as you're getting into that, you start to realize when a country has a new visa initiative, sometimes they haven't really done this before either, right? So you're working with the authorities and you're making sure you're talking to the right people and just getting everything down and reaching the same understanding. So there was a lot of that over the course of the pandemic period too. And, it's just another one of the things that we really try to instill with our teams and as a culture here is that, really, I call it the no stone unturned approach, right? You make sure that, when you're being told no, but this is the perfect solution, you get a final no, right? You make sure that you actually understand and that everybody is on the same page with what we're trying to do. And you make sure that there's no other option to get this done because, that's kind of what our value is. We're the partner that helps you get to where you need to go compliantly, but with business goals and business objectives in mind.
Final question from me, and I know Finn wants to chat more about the remote work visas, which I also find super interesting. But Brendan, other than you mentioned business expansion, which I think comes to mind for a lot of us why a company might move or open an overseas office somewhere else. But other than business expansion, why else might employers transfer or relocate and just generally move employees between offices?
Yeah. No, there's a few other reasons besides just the pure, hey, we're growing, we're gonna blow this thing up, right? We're gonna do it. We have some long tenured companies, and you see this with a lot of organizations that are a little bit more well established, that use immigration as a tool, that use mobility as a tool for employee development and for career development, and to get people more exposure. These folks that maybe they've identified as people that could get into any kind of aspect of the business, and they just want to see what works best for folks, to the others that maybe are slotted to be executives down the road, and we want to make sure they understand every aspect of the business. Those kinds of rotational programs, whether they're formalized or if it's just some initiative for a given individual, really are great tools for achieving other business objectives that aren't just pure expansion, right? It's a developmental tool to really get folks that need to or want to be more familiar with how the organization runs as a whole and get that holistic oversight into the way that things work, to get them that knowledge and to get that knowledge spread across the org. And I think a lot of the organizations that end up doing that really benefit from it, frankly, because you don't have people in their silos anymore. You actually have people that have a concrete understanding of just how everything fits together and works, and the business is better off for it. Other reasons for just having global mobility and immigration as part of its flexibility, and I think that right now we see it a lot. Right, the crisis in Ukraine and the conflict that's going on there. What has that translated to? That things that we've seen for businesses that have big operations in the Ukraine, or places that have operations in neighboring states that are either impacted by the refugee outcome of the conflict, or are thinking that the conflict could potentially extend to where they are, right, at some point. And so making sure if you have a built-in global mobility program already, and the ability to facilitate immigration needs, you're one step ahead of the curve in making sure that there's continuity in the business, because you'll be able to move folks to another office location or to another jurisdiction a little bit more seamlessly than those that have to start from scratch. And so it's almost a little bit of a safety net for the world to a certain extent. And we've seen firsthand many of our clients have to pull that cord, and we've been there to facilitate that.
Yeah, Brendan, there are a few destinations that keep popping up in this conversation that I want to have you unpack. Maybe two things. One, the reason why those destinations are so popular, and two, what those countries are doing to bring in more foreign talent to promote immigration in their countries. And just to give some background information on this question, it's come up a couple times in previous podcast episodes, but Envoy did our 2023 immigration trend survey, a few weeks back. We surveyed 500 HR professionals, all US based, but folks who specialize in immigration and global mobility for their companies. And a couple stats stuck out. So I'll read those off, Brendan, and I'll get your reaction to why these destinations are so popular. So first off, we asked companies in the past 12 months, we asked respondents in the past 12 months, did your company relocate one or more employees to work remotely in a country outside the US, or did you transfer an employee to an office overseas due to visa-related issues? 81% of companies transfer foreign national employees to an office abroad, and 80% of companies relocated employees to work remotely overseas, both because of visa-related issues in the last year. Now, of the companies that transferred or relocated employees overseas, we gave them a list of destinations, regions, and countries to see where they were sending those folks to. 62% of companies sent employees to Canada, 48% of countries sent employees to Mexico, 48% to the UK, 31% to Germany, and 25% to Australia. So again, these are countries that have popped up organically in this conversation a few times. So to cap that all off, Brendan, I wonder, can you unpack what are these countries doing that are making them such attractive destinations for U.S. employers, but I assume for employers based outside of the U.S. as well, to send foreign talent to, and why is it working?
No, it's, the list, the immigration trends report first is awesome. And the list came back, sort of what we would expect, right? And you're right. It came up organically in this conversation. They tie up pretty well. So when I hear the first two though, Finn, when I hear Canada and I hear Mexico, the things that really stick out are, maybe these are a little bit more US based employers that are targeting these jurisdictions. And the answer is probably, with the audience already here. The time zone overlap is huge, right? The proximity to the US is huge. And there's no two other countries that actually touch our border, right? Aside from Canada and Mexico. So, on one end, Canada becomes eminently popular because of a few key reasons, a couple of which I've touched on a little bit, but they're very open to immigration just as a whole. They do push the type of immigration that the U.S. also pushes, which is, we're looking for a specific type of talent, industry, individual, whatever it might be. But we're going to make it actually way easier for them to secure their status than somebody else. We're going to make it easier to get permanent residency very quickly, versus some other jurisdictions. And then, then comes the other part, which Canada has in spades, Mexico a little bit less so for some obvious reasons, but just the level of familiarity that living in Canada is, right, and doing business in Canada can be. Canada does seem, earmuffs for the folks in Canada right now, because maybe you don't want to hear this, but it is very similar to the U.S., right? There's a lot of just overlap in terms of the businesses that operate there, the manner of doing business, culturally very comfortable and familiar to folks from the U.S. And also, there's the language factor, right? Aside from our friends in Quebec and Montreal, vast majority of folks just speaking English, and it seems very comfortable and familiar to businesses to do that there. So considering the time zone overlap and then all of those cultural familiarities, that goes a long way in just becoming a really attractive destination that if you're not in the US, but you're a US company, what's the next thing? Mexico, same with the time zone overlap, obviously. I think there's a little bit more to Mexico in terms of the ease of just immigration overall. Your first go around as a business with immigration in Mexico can be a little bit challenging, just to get all the right infrastructure set up, documents in place, legal representative in place, which is a big thing where, you need somebody that signs on behalf of the business there that can represent. But once you have all of that set up, the ability to work in Mexico for a prolonged period of time, depending on the circumstances, without going through a big immigration process is attractive. The immigration process that you do go through, if you are going to be, a little bit more comprehensive in the work authorization status that you need there. Still relatively streamlined and understandable, if not a little lengthy, but still something that is not overly complex or unduly complex, making it easier to do there. And then also, Spanish is not too foreign of a language in the U.S. lexicon either, right? And so the level of comfortability in working in different sites in Mexico as well is there. I think, raising the UK, a lot of the same things that we just spoke about Canada, right? The level of familiarity with the culture and the way business is handled and, the language and all of those kind of things all play the same part. And then the UK visa regime, if you are eligible, right? If you've reached the levels of eligibility that you would need to reach to secure a skilled worker visa or to secure an ICT or something along those lines, the level of reliability essentially of that you're going to get an approval is pretty high. So, being able to count on that makes it also an attractive jurisdiction. Australia, I won't dive too deep into it because it's really a lot like Canada and the UK in those regards. So just take those, though. It is very far time zone, I will say, from the US. So that can be part of the team problem sometimes, and the overlap. And then Germany, just as a location, it's just a major hub for a lot of big business, right? I think that in a sense, there's also the centralized location within the EU, which helps. And then finally, their system, their immigration regime, and the manner of securing work and residence authorization is very dependable, right? It's one of those things where the steps, if you're eligible, and therefore we're going to go through this process, and the timelines as compared to other EU countries are just way more manageable than many. So, those are kind of the usual things that stick out. If I'm just doing a 1, 2, 3, it's the time zone overlap, right? It's the cultural sort of overlap and the ability to do business there. And then it's what is the immigration regime like? And is it conducive to encouraging immigration? And a lot of times it's yes.
One thing that we see pop up in the media a lot are news articles about Canada introduces introduced the global talent stream or a new pathway to immigrate there. Ireland is digitizing its immigration system to make the process more efficient. The UK has a new high potential visa to bring in, foreign talent from top universities around the world. And then we touched on it a little bit before, but I really want to dive into this topic a bit more. Remote work visas, which have really taken the media by storm in the past couple of years since COVID. Mexico has one. Spain most recently introduced one. You mentioned countries in the Middle East, in the Caribbean, all in an effort to bring in folks who have the ability to work remotely and bolster up those local economies. Can you unpack that phenomenon a little bit and how it's playing out in reality? Because there's a lot of buzz around it, but are folks actually taking advantage of these remote work visas, or is it still sort of just an idea?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Finn. And it's actually one that persists as the idea or the whispers of remote work visas have kind of popped up. To your first point, I think it's really interesting. And this is sort of the remote work and the nomad visas fall under the umbrella of the first point that you brought up, which is just, you're starting to see, and some have always existed, but less prevalent. You're starting to see specialized visas be more and more sort of prominent within the space, right? Visas that, even more so than the standard types of application routes did in the past, visas that really target like one specific type of individual, right? Or one specific industry. And it's a clear indication of just what that country's motivation is and what they want to bring in or propagate within the, as of today from each of those countries. It's funny because back not so long ago, whether you're thinking about the UK or you're thinking about Australia or you're thinking about some of these other jurisdictions, Germany, some of the main thing that you usually look at when somebody needs to move there is, let's get them just a work and residence permit, right? We're going to get the work and the residence permit. And granted, underneath that, there's, some different routes that you can take and it's based on your eligibility and those kind of things. But for the vast majority of folks, if it was Australia, you're getting a subclass 4A2 now. That's these are in the past, you're getting in the UK, you're getting a UK tier 2 visa, right? It's the standard, what you're getting. Now, there's a lot of different things there's more different things to look at depending on what type of individual is making this application, more routes that you might be able to avail yourself of if the main one doesn't work or if the main one is insufficient. And I think that countries, on one end of the spectrum, it's helpful because countries are doing this and they're creating more routes for folks that maybe just didn't tick one of the boxes for the standard type of route in the past. But it's also just, it's interesting that countries are sort of creating the capacity to limit the type of people that maybe will eventually be able to apply for work and residence authorization. Because if it continues in this trend, right, and a country really wants to shut down immigration for one reason or another, like we've seen in some other jurisdictions over time, they're going to have the ability to do that by literally picking and choosing who can apply based on very granular and tightly defined applicants, right? So it's an interesting phenomenon that is going on, but it does have its pros and cons, at least in the current setting. On the remote nomad visa front, I can't think of a hotter topic that's been coming up over the course of the last, especially 18, 24 months. Pandemic, nobody has to come to the office. I'm kind of tired of being at home. Always wanted to go to this place. This might be my only shot. How do we make this happen? How do we as a business retain our talent and make sure that we're affording people opportunities during this very strange time? And then, the culture having the understanding that remote work is here to stay, right? It's not, they might become hybrid. Some folks do have to go back in depending on the organization's requirements, but as an overall concept, it's not going away. And so countries, and we talked a little bit about the first to market aspect of things earlier. Countries in the Caribbean, Finn, every place that you listed off, in your description, wanted to get there first because maybe it wasn't a popular place for immigration in the past or to get talent in, right? Maybe we need the tourism dollars. Maybe we need the industry dollars that could come from just establishing something here. And so a lot of those countries went through that process, and the visas are real. Finn, to your earlier question, they exist. People do take advantage of them, but I think what you saw over the course of the last couple of years as well is some countries were first to market, and some bigger ones were too. I mean, Dubai had a remote work visa early, or UAE, I should say. But a lot of countries we saw, these bigger ones that are now rolling out remote work visa options, were sort of, I think, lying in wait and seeing how it worked out for some other countries. Where do we need to proactively fill in gaps and make sure we can facilitate this and make it all work? But the fact that they are rolling them out now shows that, just how real of a thing this is, because what they don't want to miss out on is companies that are afraid of losing talent because they don't have an option to work in some of these other places. And then if you think of it from the country's perspective as well, this big company X was never going to open an office in Madrid. They were never going to come to Spain, but they have a bunch of workers that want to work from Spain. How do we create an opportunity to do that? And maybe we, backdoor an actual business presence here and get that industry going and become a big destination for things like the tech workers who oftentimes are the main beneficiaries of these kinds of programs, right? So it's a really interesting time. You're seeing sort of the push and pull between companies and governments and making sure that we're not foreclosing any opportunities on the industry and business side or on the talent side amongst all of those stakeholders. And I would expect to continue to see rollouts of new nomad visa options, remote work visa options amongst those countries that have them or have recently rolled them out and want to be more expansive about it.
Yeah, that was a really, really fascinating breakdown of the whole landscape. I imagine it's going to be exciting to work with so many different companies in various industries who are navigating these new waters and helping them do so. I just have one last question, and Eric, I'll toss it back to you after this. We just had a nice satellite view of a couple of questions that were a satellite view of the current global immigration landscape. I want to just take it back down to the ground level with this question. In the U.S., right, a listener who may be somewhat knowledgeable about the U.S. immigration system, they may know that, okay, if I want to hire an employee on an H-1B, or if I'm a person who wants to get sponsored for an H-1B, I need to work with an immigration lawyer here in the U.S. to make that happen. Mm-hmm. What is the equivalent to that overseas? I imagine it varies depending on the country that you're working in, but is it always the same as in the U.S. where you need to work with a lawyer, or does it differ?
Yeah, it's definitely different. And you're right. It varies country to country. So, in the U.S., that's literally just by virtue of regulatory laws, and then ethics, right? And what state bar ethics require, and what the U.S. government has deemed to be necessary, not just in immigration, but really from a law firm perspective. How do law firms operate, and how does all that work? So there are similarities in some other jurisdictions where, whether it is that you need to be an attorney or a barrister or a solicitor or whatever it might be, some countries require that, right? Other countries have something a little bit in the middle, where maybe you need to be somebody that is licensed to practice immigration, but you don't need to be a solicitor or a lawyer or a barrister. And other countries don't see immigration in a legal sense really at all. Obviously, it's a compliance issue, and there are laws around it. But what they don't see the practice of immigration work falling under the legal umbrella, right? And needing to be done by a lawyer. So for instance, a good example of that is Singapore, where immigration is such a big need, right? Because it's such a popular destination, especially as, Hong Kong has had, some of its changes over the course of the last couple of years, big employers wanting to, reestablish headquarter locations. But even up until that point, Singapore being a prime destination for countries because it was so business friendly, right? And so foreigner friendly. The immigration procedure in Singapore, and it's getting a little bit tougher now for other reasons, but leading up to today, that process has been intentionally easy, right? Or at least easy relative to other jurisdictions. If you fit the criteria, you have this option 2. So an employment pass, an S pass, or something else, to really utilize. And that the practice of that immigration work has traditionally been done by just service providers, firms that are dedicated to doing immigration, but do not require special kind of licensure, do not require, any kind of immigration training earlier on. And that's just a function of the way that the country sees immigration, right? They want to encourage immigration. They don't want to make it too onerous or make it too difficult, and they want to have resources available to people that need to have their immigration facilitated, right at hand, right? So it really runs the gamut, Finn. And some countries, it really just depends on where immigration and the practice of the field as a whole fits within the legal regime or doesn't. Right. So it is interesting, and there's a wide spectrum on that one.
So Brendan, we've been talking a lot about immigration programs, mobility programs. What would you tell companies or listeners who don't have immigration and mobility at the table? You mentioned some of the reasons businesses might move people around. It's business expansion. It's those programs to maybe develop a future executive leaders. For those companies that don't have immigration and mobility at the table, are they missing out on anything?
Sure. Yeah. And I think, there comes a time for, I'd say, most organizations that global mobility becomes inevitable, right? It's just something that ends up happening, or a need that ends up happening. You're going to have, if you're a small company and you're growing, you're going to end up noticing that you've got a supplier in some other country that is going to save the company a bunch more money, and you need to visit them to vet the process out, right? That one business trip is all of a sudden you're tiptoeing into global mobility a little bit, and you're going to have to start watching. You might realize that there's talent or lack thereof in the specific type of role that you're looking to fill, but the perfect candidate is in Sweden. Right. And now we're going to need to figure out how to facilitate that and make that happen. So I would say that, for the companies that don't have it at the table now, if things keep going in that right trajectory, it will be at the table. It's almost an inevitability. And, that's a good thing, right? It increases your options as a business to get the right people into place and to meet the right vendors and suppliers, and to, do all of the things that are going to end up making the business successful. Eric, to your question, if there's companies out there that are intentionally holding off on having global mobility, be a part of the equation, I would say that each business is different and the initiatives are different, and maybe there's just an emphasis or a wide range of resources, or the way that the business is working just doesn't require it. But I also think that one of the main takeaways that I would always impart for a circumstance like that is that you don't ever want to foreclose seeking foreign talent or getting out there into the space as a business and therefore having some semblance of a global mobility program, because of just the wide variety and wide opportunity that's out there in the world that can help your business thrive and grow and meet your needs. So, I do think that it's a little bit of an inevitability for most companies as they're growing and as their needs expand. And for those that are just wary of tiptoeing into that international space, I would say, don't be scared. There's lots of good providers out there and folks to help shepherd through that process. And, the reward is way worth the, maybe some of the uncomfortability about establishing something at the front end.
Totally. And continuing the words of wisdom, what words of wisdom do you have for early professionals who are first being exposed to global mobility or global immigration, whether they studied it or have prior experience, or they're just coming in completely fresh?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit of a chalk answer, but just be curious, right, and want to learn. I think in this space, this is what we were going over right at the front end, so bringing this full circle. But there's always something to learn in this space, and whether it's just immigration or it's global mobility as a whole, it's almost impossible to know everything, right? I would venture to say it is impossible, but I try not to be 100% on anything in this space. So, the idea is just be curious and continue. Don't be shy about tiptoeing in and getting exposure to other segments of how global mobility works on the tax side, on the relo side. It will only make you more helpful to the clients that you serve, over the course of time. And whether that's because you've got a little bit of the knowledge that can get somebody, 5 yards down the line or whatever it might be, or you can take them all the way and shepherd them through an entire process, or importantly, you can give them the right referral and point them in the right direction, to get those needs handled and to get a program set up. You'll only get all of that by experience and by being curious during your experience of working through the mobility space. So, don't hunker down, don't put your head down, don't silo off. I think, this is a complex procedure. There's a lot of different parties involved. There's a lot of different interesting nuances to always take into account. And making sure that you kind of dive in, get to know folks, get to know the material, get to know, just what's going on in the world. That'll go a long way for you quickly, within this space.
Well, that's sage advice from an international man of mystery. My term, not yours. But Brendan, you've been very generous with your time. Eric and I have both worked with you for years, but I always appreciate getting to chat with you. I always learn something new, so it's always a pleasure. Before we wrap this up, any final thoughts? Anything you want to plug? Any final words for the audience here on global immigration, global mobility in 2023, and what Envoy's doing?
Yeah, no, nothing profound. First, just a quick effusive thank you to everybody in the audience for, tuning in and checking this out. Another quick thank you, Eric, Finn, always good talking with both of you as well. This is a great forum and a great medium. So it's very cool. And just, global mobility overall at this stage, I think it's an exciting time. I think that, people are a little bit wary right now, right? The economy is tough. Layoffs tend to be in the news pretty significantly in companies that tend to have a lot of those global mobility needs. But there's a lot to look forward to, right? We're coming out of the pandemic in earnest. Business travel is, as I mentioned before, picking up. Folks are getting back out there. Different things that tended to be a little bit more shut down, whether it was countries as a whole or industries, that were operating, are now back up and running and humming. So, there's a lot to look forward to in the space. And, the main thing that we sort of impart upon everybody now is just make sure you remain on your toes and you remain flexible. Things change at a much faster pace than they ever have in the history of, time. And that counts for the immigration and global mobility space, I think almost especially. Everything that we saw, quick changes happening, regulations changing over the pandemic period, that made it okay to do that in the eyes of a lot of companies, in the eyes of a lot of governments. And so being nimble, being on your toes, being in touch with the folks that are going to help shepherd you through your needs and reach those company goals, that's the name of the game. And we look forward to what's to come 2023 and beyond.
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to Immigration and Mobility Decoded. If you watched this video on YouTube and you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the Envoy Global YouTube channel for more content like this. Otherwise, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, everyone.